My presentation today will be on a part of the endocrine system. Does anyone know what this is? Go ahead and put an X in the chat if you think you know what this is. It's the pituitary gland, a very important part of the endocrine system. If you were thinking the wrong thing, go ahead and put an X in the chat. And if you got it right, then go ahead and put a thumbs up. So now that we know one of the glands I will be talking about today, let's talk about another gland that's conducting the pituitary, the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus you can think of like a musical conductor of the pituitary gland. Let me show you where this hormonal symphony is happening. The pituitary gland is about the size of a pea. It hangs inferior to the hypothalamus and it's medial to the ears and posterior to the nasal. Together they sit anterior and inferior to the thalamus. They're connected by what's called the infundibulum. Neurons inside the hypothalamus extend into two separate parts of the pituitary gland, the anterior and the posterior glands. Each gland is responsible for secreting different hormones. You could also think of them like different tempos and beats that communicate to other parts of the body. The posterior lobe of the pituitary gland is an extension of the hypothalamus and does not make its own hormones, but it stores and excretes them. You could think of this as like the music that's produced out of the back room. There are 6 hormones made in the anterior gland, 7 made in the hypothalamus, and 2 that are stored and then excreted when needed from the posterior gland. Let's start with the hormones of the hypothalamus. You can see from these names that the H is always going to stand for hormone, and the R stands for releasing, and the I is inhibiting. We will discuss more about ADH and oxytocin in a minute, but first let's talk about the 5 other hormones in the hypothalamus. The gonadotropin, the corticotropin, the thyrotropin, and growth hormone releasing hormone and growth hormone inhibiting hormone. These 5 are the communicators to the anterior pituitary gland. Essentially, they conduct the hormone music that the anterior pituitary makes. This shows you exactly how each hormone interacts. You can see the growth hormone releasing hormone and the growth hormone inhibiting hormone work together in a negative feedback loop with the anterior pituitary gland. This hormone is responsible for growth-related disorders. The gonadotropin stimulates the follicle-stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. These 2 hormones from the anterior pituitary affect the reproductive organs, from puberty to regulation of menses, and the production and maturation of sex cells. The corticotropin stimulates the adrenocorticotropic, which stimulates the adrenal cortex where the stress hormone cortisol is made. The thyrotropin stimulates the thyroid-stimulating hormone. As the name suggests, it stimulates the thyroid to produce hormones and is also a negative feedback loop. We're going to talk about these last 2 hormones that are made by the hypothalamus. This is a more in-depth look at the posterior pituitary gland that is taken out of our textbook on page 745. Here you can see in blue, oxytocin is made in the hypothalamus and then transported to the posterior pituitary and stored there. This is the same for ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormone. The release of ADH is controlled by a negative feedback loop. In pregnancy, ADH production is decreased, and this results in more urine output. Lastly, we have prolactin. It is the only hormone that is not activated by the hypothalamus. It is instead activated by lactotroph cells. The anterior hormones that are in the box are the tropic hormones, meaning they stimulate other glands to produce hormones. Here's a better look at the tropic hormones of the anterior pituitary gland and what they do. I'll give you a second to look at that. Let's go ahead and talk about oxytocin. It plays a very specific role in pregnancy. This again is made in the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior pituitary and releases different times in the body. One of the times is when fetal development is complete. It releases and stimulates uterine contractions and cervical dilation. The uterus becomes more sensitive to this hormone at the end of pregnancy. This is a positive feedback loop. Although levels are lower after birth, oxytocin is also a key factor in mammary milk ejection, allowing the letdown reflex. The sucking of a newborn actually triggers the hypothalamus to synthesize the oxytocin. It's also believed that oxytocin plays a role in love feelings like attachment and in sexual encounters. Studies show that oxytocin plays a big role in postpartum depression and other postpartum syndromes, as well as other hormones like progesterone, cortisol, and thyroid hormones. Oxytocin also helps prevent excessive bleeding after birth by stimulating uterine contractions. This production is stimulated by nursing. It also is linked to the bonding feelings that nursing brings. Prolactin also plays a huge role in pregnancy. Prolactin makes the mammary tissue grow. The name prolactin states exactly what else it does. It promotes lactation in the mammary tissue. The stimulation of the nipple is what causes the release of prolactin when nursing. Prolactin also inhibits estrogen formation, which is the reason for ceasing of menstrual periods and can decrease the sex drive. In summary, the hormones in the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus affect growth, adrenal function, thyroid, reproductive organs, stimulate other glands in the endocrine system that need to produce hormones. They control your blood pressure, your heart rate, body temperature, digestion. They have to do with anger and also play a role in fatigue. Lastly, I'll leave you with this because it made me giggle. What's up, hypothalamus? What are you and pituitary doing this weekend? Hey, brain, we're going to release sex hormones, pig out, drink a ton, and just go nuts. How about you? I'm going to stay home and read a book. How are we roommates? These are my references. Thanks for watching.